This podcast series is supported by members at Patreon. If you want to support this podcast series, head to patreon.com/Cascadian Beer. Who says beer needs to stick to tradition? You can take the best of both worlds, brew them in a well-crafted process, and create the ultimate mashup. Welcome to the Cascadian Beer Podcast. My name's Aaron, and I'm a Cascadian. I have a background in radio and television broadcasting. I am a music producer and have a passion for beer. I don't consider myself to be an expert in beer by any means, but I do enjoy and respect the craft and the passion of these brewmasters. I want to learn from these pioneers on what sets them apart from the rest and why they choose to call Cascadia their home. Cascadia is a bioregion in the Pacific Northwest on the North American continent. It is made up of the U.S. states of Washington and Oregon, as well as the Canadian province of British Columbia. In this podcast series, I'll be profiling the unique breweries of Cascadia, a region that has a strong presence on the international beer scene. In this episode, I've hopped on the SkyTrain in Metro Vancouver and headed out to New Westminster. This city has a long history in the Lower Mainland. Strategically placed on the shores of the Fraser River, it was a major outpost during the Fraser Gold Rush. A short walk along the riverside, you'll arrive at Steel Oak Brewing Company.
I'm Jorden Foss. I'm one of the co-owners of Steel Oak Brewing Company.
I'm Eric Mouta, the head brewer here at Steel Oak.
So Jorden, how long has Steel Oak been in existence?
We'll have been in existence 2 years on Thursday. That's doors open in existence. We started construction in May of 2013.
How did that process start?
Yeah, so the place came to existence. My business partner and I are old high school friends. We were over in Tofino. Probably, I guess it would have been 2011, 2012, now that I think about it. And Tofino Brewing Company had just opened up. It was the first time that we'd ever seen a brewery where you could go in just like you could at a winery and taste the product. And it was the first time we'd ever seen growlers before and taking beer to go. And so we just started chit-chatting with those guys, and they were very open and asking them where they were selling beer. And they said they were just selling it to Tofino, and they were selling out everything they made. We thought it was a really unique idea and unique concept for a small community. We thought that it might be unique and neat for New Westminster, which is also a pretty small town, even though it's in the middle of basically everything in Vancouver. When we came back, we started looking into it a little bit more. And later on that year, guys like Parallel 49 and Powell Street and all those guys started opening up and kind of reaffirmed that what we thought would work was working elsewhere. We decided that both being from here, that we should go ahead.
Where does the name Steel and Oak come from?
So Steel and Oak, it's two-part. It's a play on a very basic level, the two vessels that you can make beer in. Stainless steel fermentation vessels and or oak barrels, so steel and oak. But on a deeper level, and where it actually originated from was it tells the tale of the city of New Westminster, which is where I'm from and which is where brewing actually began in Lower Mainland. New Westminster had the first brewery here in 1862. It talks about how the city was built upon old materials like wood and oak and cedar, but it also talks about the modern way that the city is going forward now with us, which is where the steel comes into play. So it's about the old way and the new way of doing things, and which is what we try to do in our beers. And we always try and make sure that we appreciate the past in order to make good quality beer going forward in the future.
Right. So how did you come to be at Steel and Oak, Eric?
So I came in as a tasting room employee originally. So I started basically the day we opened the doors. Started in the tasting room with the knowledge that if we got busier, I will help out in the brewery. Within a week, we were busy enough that I needed to start helping out in the brewery. And it just went from there. I started brewing, helping out. There was old brewmaster Peter Schulz that recently left. He's taught me a lot. I was homebrewing before that, but yeah, just started off really as a random employee.
Yeah, we hired Eric originally. Now, my business partner and I used to homebrew a bit, especially once we knew we wanted to open this in New Westminster. But we quickly realized that our homebrew wasn't good enough quality to open a brewery with. So we knew we needed a brewer a professional brewer to open the brewery with. And so we'd hired a guy by the name of Peter Schulz that's German trained. and Pete opened the brewery with us. We hired Eric with the thought that Eric would eventually probably step into the assistant brewer's role, which happened a lot faster than we initially anticipated based on how quickly we were selling beer. Pete's decided to do some soul searching and some traveling, and he's heading back to Germany, I think, eventually. So it worked out that Eric had been trained up for a couple of years and was able to fill Pete's shoes and fill the role.
And so how much brewing experience have you had, Jorden?
I've had pretty much zero. Well, I shouldn't say that. I homebrewed for probably a year or two. I've taken some courses on brewing. So I do have a pretty good knowledge of how the brewing system works, but not enough that I would ever trust myself to be the head brewer of any sort of brewery, especially the amount of money you have to sink into it. So we knew that we needed somebody that had experience, and so that was something that we never had to worry about.
How many years have you been brewing, Eric?
I had been brewing, getting close to 10 years home brewing, and kind of started off small with the kits and was going all out, and a lot of reading. Even when I was in between places and I couldn't brew, I was just reading. I was online on forums and reading books and stuff the whole time. So I've been interested in it for a while.
Any submissions to any beer competitions or anything as a home brewer?
I never did that as a home brewer, and I'm still reluctant. Now we do that here at Steel Oak, but I have my problems with the competitions. Partly, a big thing is that you have to brew to a style, and I don't like necessarily getting into one specific style. And just, it can be a great beer, but if it's not an ESB, or a traditional ESB, let's say, then it is judged poorly. And my friends were my judges, I guess, and they drank a lot of beer and kept coming back for more. So I took that as a good sign.
Yeah, that's the real award at the end of the day. Your friends keep coming back.
Exactly. Yeah, and we have been fortunate enough to win a couple awards for sure, and we won first place for our dark lager at the BC Beer Awards this past year. We also won first place for our smoked Hefeweizen at Festival in Penticton this past year. So we do get to enjoy some awards here and there. But as Eric said, Steel Oak's all about making, taking the European style bases of beers and doing something creative and different with them.
Yeah, because you have a red Pilsner and you have the smoked Hefeweizen and the dark lager. Those are mashups really between different beers, right?
Yeah, they're beers that don't, necessarily exist, especially out here.
Yeah, the dark lager being the exception there.
Dark lager being an exception to the rule, but the red Pilsner was a beer that we created that actually doesn't even fit into a category and that never really existed. And the smoked Hefeweizen was a beer that got done a lot in Bamberg, Germany, which is where our original brewer Pete was trained, but it never really been done out here. And it was definitely the beer that we came out with first and that we were the most noticed for was that smoked Hefeweizen. So,
have those beers been in the lineup from the start?
Yeah, so we opened going into Vancouver Craft Beer Week, and our first time for anybody to try our beer was the opening day. And we only had smoked Hefeweizen available at that time. We hadn't had anything else brewed through yet. So it was the smoked Hefeweizen, the dark lager, the red Pilsner, and our Royal City Ale were the first beers that we had come out with, followed quickly by the dry hopped ESB after that. So,
what challenges do you have as the brewmaster, Eric, to make sure everything is well balanced and the dark malts or the smokiness of the Hefeweizen isn't too overpowering?
With those ones, so I was fortunate that Peter Schulz, as mentioned before, he came in, and all the flagships right now are his original recipes. And so I was fortunate to have that as a base to come in, and I don't have to design a whole lineup for a brewery. I have one that's good. There's a few minor tweaks that we've been doing basically since the beginning. We're always trying to improve. But the base has basically stayed the same. And so now, as we go forward, I get the chance to try something new, kind of bring my own tastes and feel to the new beers.
Yeah, and I think just to add to what Eric was saying, that the one challenge and that we had at the very beginning is, like you said, how do you balance all these different flavor compounds and malt bills and hops. And I mean, I'll just use the smoked half as a very good example. When we initially did that beer, we put a certain percentage of smoked malt in it, Beechwood smoked malt, and it was so overpowering. And then we just dropped it by 5% and you barely noticed it. And so it's one of those malts that really makes a huge difference, and you have to be super delicate with it. And one of the things that we always strive for at Steel Oak is to make things in balance no matter what they are. And I think that's why the smoked Hefeweizen is as popular as it is that it's even if you're not a fan of smoky beers, you normally would still like it because it just whispers through. And for your people that may not be initially like into that traditional type of Hefeweizen, the smoked quality balances out those banana and clove notes just enough that it makes it interesting enough for a person that might not dig traditional hefts. So I think that's why it's been such a nice, unique beer for us. And it's kind of what we strive to do with our whole lineup, how to make things balance, but still pique your interest without having to hit you over the head with some crazy ass beer that just screams at you with different flavors. And that's what we try to do.
Did you run out of beer in the first month there?
Yeah. So in the first 2 weeks, we ran out of beer. We had, even when we started up, it's funny, like in Vancouver, which has got a pretty big industry, even though we've only been open for 2 years, we're kind of veterans now in the grand scheme of things within this pretty young business. And when we opened, we had no idea how much beer we were going to sell. We had no other real breweries to kind of benchmark our business plan against. And so we thought we had more than enough tanks and more than enough beer, and we were just wrong. The tasting room was way busier than we ever thought it would be. And we had an issue where we just couldn't make the beer fast enough. The other thing, too, is Steel Oak makes a couple lager beers, which take longer to make. And so we're always at a bit of a disadvantage with how fast we can turn the beer around. And we give all our ales and lagers a full 4 or 6 weeks, so we don't rush anything. So it was interesting. We got a week's vacation, which was fun, but I definitely wouldn't want to run out of beer again. We always do walk that thin line now because the beer does sell so well. I'm trying to keep up with the demand. So,
and where is your greatest demand? Is that in your tasting room, or is that now supplying people?
Yeah, now it's definitely supplying pubs and restaurants and liquor stores. The tasting room, being that it's only 20 people can fit in there, you can only really do so much volume, and we've kind of hit that capacity of what we're going to do. So everything else we add after that, as far as tank capacity and brewing capacity, all really gets sold out the back end. So for us right now, it's about demand in the interior. We're trying to service the island. We're trying to service, and of course, all of our local market as well in Vancouver.
So, Jorden, with you trying to expand into the interior and out to the island, what is happening in the brew house to make that happen?
Right now, it's a lot of the same stuff. So what's happened and what happens to, I think, a lot of breweries of our size is that your initial goal is to you get your core lineup together of beers that you think are really solid, and then but as any creative type, all you want to do is keep creating new and cool stuff for people to drink, and in all honesty, selfishly for us to be able to drink too. But what ends up happening is one or two of those beers take off, and they become your Fat Tug, because Driftwood sells out of the Vancouver Island sells so much Fat Tug. It's their flagship, and they just kill it with that beer. And so for us, the Royal City Ale and the Red Pilsner started to take off, and we were basically forced into brewing those two beers way more than we initially thought we would. Right now, if you look at the brewery over there, I think we've got Royal City Ale in 3 tanks right now.
Yeah, 3 out of the 7 tanks.
Yeah, and then the other 2, and then 2 more are Red Pilsner. So we have 5 of the 7 tanks are 2 beers. So basically, we're just trying to keep up with those. And then what had also happened is the Dark Lager won that award, and then all of a sudden it skyrocketed as well. So unfortunately, when you order equipment, it takes 3 to 5 months, sometimes even longer to get here. You're always either trying to guess going forward, or you're constantly lagging behind a little bit. So for us, in January, February, when beer season is a touch slower, we were kind of in a good little space. And now that summer's hit, we're just trying to keep up, really.
How many days of the week are you brewing?
Between 2 and 4 days, we're actually physically brewing.
Yeah. And some days we'll do high gravity brew into the bigger tanks. But once that 100 hectoliter tank arrives in 2 weeks, that's 6 brews altogether to get into that one tank. We'll pretty much be going around the clock at that point in time.
And you were showing me the system. It's a little bit different than normal. Can you describe it a bit?
Yeah, so most breweries, they mash into what is called their mash/lauter tun, and you can't change the temperature of your mash when you're in there. it depends on, but most of them you can't. You go in at one temperature, you leave it, and that's the British style of doing it, and it can make amazing beer. Now, if you want the German style, which our old brewmaster Peter Schulz did, you need to be able to change the temperature of your mash as you go. And so you mash in as low as 50 degrees Celsius, and then you bring it up slowly to, let's say, 63, then to 68, rest there for a while, then up to 72. And you're getting different enzymes and different reactions happening at those temperatures, and that lets you do different things to the beers. Now, wheat beers benefit a lot from that. Basically, traditional German beers are the ones you do with that, and that's how beer is made in Germany. And so you get a different result out of what you do. And so that limits us in how fast we can brew because we are mashing in to our kettle. We can't start the next brew until the first brew is out of the kettle. It slows us down, and we're not the only brewery to do that. We're not revolutionary or anything in that sense, but it does produce different beer that a lot of breweries in Vancouver don't have the capacity to do.
Eric, can you tell me the size of the whole brew system?
It is 17 and a half hectoliters, so 1,750 hectoliters, 15 barrel for people that do it in that way. And then we have tanks. We have 4 tanks that are 35 hectoliters, so 2 brews to go into them. And 3 tanks that are 52 and a half, so 3 brews to go into them. And we also just got a 17 hectoliter fermenter, so that's a single brew. That's going to be the fun one to do, the more experimental, the one-offs, the ones that we know are great beers but won't necessarily be the best sellers. There's one beer in particular, the Smoke Lager, that we've done previously that is one of my favorite beers that we've ever done.
Mine too, actually.
But it doesn't sell. It's not for everyone. It's
super smoky.
Yeah, it's quite smoky, and then it has a bit of a citrus kick to it as well. And I know it's not for everyone. And there's some people that love it, but there's a lot of people that don't. And we found 35 hectoliters is maybe a bit too much. Granted, that was before we bottled.
Yeah.
So that might be easier, but we definitely can do 17 hectoliters of it, and I'll be happy.
Yeah.
I hope somebody else is too.
Now, recently there was the first Collaboration Fest for Vancouver Craft Beer Week, and you guys took the People's Choice Awards. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For your Team Mookie.
Tumeki,
Yeah, Tumeki.
Yeah.
And that was done with Strange Fellows.
Yes.
Tell me the story about that beer. How did that come about?
So we were asked to do, Vancouver Craft Beer Week does a collaboration beer every year. Proceeds go to charity. And we were asked to brew it and choose a partner. I was actually away on vacation when the initial thing got chosen. So I wasn't involved with the choosing Strange Fellows, but we know they make great beer and they're fun to work with. So we asked them, like, hey, do you guys want to brew a beer together? So the actual brew day doesn't involve as much collaboration as people might think because they don't know how to operate our brew house, everything. So that part, that's where the media was. There was a lot of pictures being taken and they weren't there. But it's all beforehand when ideas are getting thrown back and forth of, first of all, what type of beer we're going to brew. Just that there's all these ideas. You want to do something interesting in some way to keep people kind of excited. Well, I mean, we like to keep things fairly classic in a sense. And so we threw out ideas. We tried different things, even just adding tinctures of something to an existing beer to know how these different flavors will meld. And then there's a few ideas that didn't work out. And then talking to Ian, the brewmaster / owner at Strange Fellows, was actually one of his assistant brewers, and I don't recall the name of that guy. But he had mentioned that there was an old friend in Montreal had made a beer with these things called Tasmanian pepperberries that it made a really interesting beer. And we were talking about some kind of weird peppercorn to add to a Saison because those flavors usually meld well together. I had never heard of Tasmanian pepperberries. Nobody had. Vancouver, I called all the specialty spice stores around trying to find some to do a pilot batch, and there were none available. But the description of the things sounded amazing. It was peppery, fruity at the same time, like kind of slow burn heat that we wanted to keep subtle. And so I started looking around on the internet where I could find these. I found a spice store in Colorado, got them FedExed over as quickly as possible so we had time to do a pilot brew because we wanted to nail down this recipe. We wanted to make sure we weren't just winging it when it came down to the big thing. And so we tried it out. Yeah, he was right. They were amazing. They just have this weird flavor. It's hard to... I don't know why they're not more popular in cooking in general, because they're like a pepper, but with way more depth. So we just kept a classic Saison and added that to it, and it just brought out all these things. And we added some New Zealand hops to give it a lot of floral aroma, a bit of citrus zest in there. And everything just melded together. A few minor tweaks after the pilot, and that was that. So it was a lot of just back and forth between, and that's how collaborations work. And the actual brew day is a bunch of guys sitting around drinking some beers, which is great.
Jorden, if there's somebody wanting to go down the same path as well, what advice can you give them?
I would say get a lot of money and get twice as much as you think is a lot. That's really, unfortunately, in this business, is very capital intensive. Equipment is not cheap, and if you find early success, it gets even more expensive because you have to buy more equipment before you actually get to reap the rewards of any of the profit that you may be making. And the other thing that I say to people is that they need to be careful based on where they're opening. If a brewery they think is going to operate like a brass neck style in Vancouver, where your tasting room is going to be the only thing that makes you the money. It's a really dangerous game to play when you put all of your eggs into a tasting room basket, and then on a Tuesday night, no one's in it, and you start to sweat bullets because you've planned a brewery to just sell through the front door. Certain breweries that do it well, Brassneck being that main example, but there isn't necessarily a ton of room for more Brassnecks. So my advice is always to be prepared to not only expect success in your tasting room, but also to allow for some sales through the back end, and to make sure that you hustle right from the beginning. The days are over where opening a brewery is just enough for you to sell beer. You need to get out there just like any job and get the beer into people's hands, and it needs to be bloody good because a lot of guys are making great beer right now. And the last thing the industry needs is a lot of breweries popping up making subpar beer and watering down the industry. What we really need is people stepping up and making great quality beer so that everybody else decides to try and one-up each other, and as an industry as a whole starts to make top-notch high-quality beer.
But in a friendly way.
Always in a friendly way. That's the one wonderful thing about this industry, is that it's such a friendly industry. Like, we'll give each other hard times when we win awards and somebody else doesn't, or something happens to us. But it's all good. We always appreciate what everybody else is doing, and the beer being made out there right now is really good. And we're all starting to take pieces of the pie away from the big boys, and it's more about collaboration than it is competition.
Yeah, it's the only industry that I know of that I can call our so-called competitors and ask them a very technical question of, I've been having this issue. How do you guys deal with it? And they'll flat out tell me. They won't beat around the bush. There are a few things that you kind of don't share about your trade secrets or whatever, but for the most part, I'll call them up and be like, hey, I don't know how to do this. What do you guys do? What's your experience? And I'll ask a few people and get their input. If we're short on ingredients, if I need some hops, I'll call them up and be, hey, do you guys have this? I'd love some, and we'll hit you up the next time. There's just no other industry that I know of that our so-called competitors are this friendly to each other.
So tell me about bottling day. Do you have a bottling line here?
Yes, we do. Yeah, so we've got, it's a Maheen bottling line that most breweries in Vancouver around our size have, which is great because that also means issues. We can all chat about it and
spare parts.
Yeah. So that's great. It's mostly a great machine, sometimes very finicky. And it takes 3 people to operate, 2 kind of menial loading and unloading of the bottles, and then 1 person that's there watching it, making sure everything is working properly.
So it's just kegs and bottles at the moment, Jorden, no cans?
We do cans. We started canning our Royal City Ale. So our Royal City Ale is an American blonde style ale, and it was draft only up until March, April, I guess, of this last year. And it was our most popular beer, our number one seller, especially in the tasting room and in New Westminster itself. Royal City is what New Westminster is actually called, or its nickname is the Royal City. And then we decided we thought it would be a great beer to put in cans. So there's a great company in Vancouver called West Coast Canning, and they have a mobile canning line, good dudes. So we started to can that in the Tallboy 473 ml cans, 4-packs, and quickly found out that there's no faster way to deplete your stock of beer than putting it in a can. The one wonderful thing about 650 ml bottles, and that's the other warning that I always tell to other breweries that are starting up of our size, 650 ml bottles, as much as you can love a can, the 650 ml bottles allow you to control your growth a little bit better. The margins are better on a 650 ml bottle, but even putting that aside, you don't sell through the beer as fast in a 650 ml, which sounds insane and silly to say that you don't want to sell as much beer as fast as we do now. But when your main constraints are size of space and how much capital you have in order to invest in more tanks, slow growth isn't a bad thing. As soon as we put beer in cans, we actually don't have Royal City Ale in cans. We haven't had it for 4 weeks because we sold out in a week, and we just can't make it fast enough. So as much as I love having cans, and I do, we probably should have waited till we had some more capacity.
But they're great. When I go camping, I grab some Royal City Ale.
Yeah.
When I go hiking.
And it's a good beer. It's a beer you want a 4-pack of, and it's refreshing, and it's so I'm not surprised we sell through it so much, but
that's the reason we have 3 tanks full of Royal City Ale right now.
Yeah,
is because of that.
Yeah.
What is your favorite beer that you make to pair with your favorite food?
Ooh, see, the beer is the easy one. The food to pair it with.
What's your favorite beer that we make?
I'd say the dark lager.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this probably switches, but I feel I go back to the dark lager more often than any other beer I go back to.
See, whereas I probably drink the Royal City Ale the most, but I would actually say that my favorite beer of our flagships that we do is the dry hopped ESB. But my overall favorite beer that I think we've ever done is the smoked honey doppelbock. But the beer that I find pairs the best with food, and when I'm trying to do that, is the red Pilsner. The red Pilsner is always like Royal City Ale and red Pilsner, I always say are 1 and 1A. Red Pilsner has a nice malty backbone, but it has a crisp bitterness. So I really like Thai food and Indian food and something with some heat. And the red Pilsner is fantastic with food that has a little bit of heat to it. The bitterness just accents it, but it also scrubs your palate so that you can
and the
just get
sweetness is there at the beginning, but it ends up crisp. So I agree completely.
So I'd say my favorite beer, definitely flagships, would be ESB. I think, even though I drink Royal City Ale the most, but red Pilsner pairs the best with food. Best beer overall for me is smoked honey doppelbock. So I guess that's kind of a loaded answer.
Try it all.
Yeah. But I've said this before. The beers are all they're like our children, right? And you like each one of them for a different reason. And some sell better than others, and the ones that don't sell as well, that is the highest quality beer, is we make this beer called Rogenweizen, and it is lights out. And other brewers just love it, but it doesn't sell that well because people get scared by the name Rogenweizen. And I don't blame them because they
don't even know how to pronounce it, first of all.
But anyways, it's I like them all for different reasons. But hopefully that kind of answered your question. In anyways, yeah.
Who's inspiring you at the moment? What beer is really inspiring you?
Oh, that's a really good question. Eric, do you want to take this one first?
I get inspiration all over the place. So I don't know if there's just one particular. I mean, there's a lot of great brewers in Vancouver, all over, but I get inspiration from a random beer that a friend brings over. It could be a home brew that a friend brings over for me to try. And it could be a lot from eating. So different kind of flavors that meld well together at a restaurant that I go to, or if I'm watching a cooking show on TV, I'll be like, yeah, those flavors would pair well together. And let's see how I can incorporate that into a beer without being overpowering, but just using those kind of basic pairing techniques.
Yeah, and I'll say I get inspired by a lot of our local brewery friends. The boys over at Dagrad, who we're really good friends with, they always inspire me anyways, because they make just Belgian style beer, and they make lights out phenomenal, award winning, like lots of award winning beers, but it never sells as well as it should, because it's a big, bold beer that people are afraid of. And it's a beer that you buy for a special occasion. And what I love is that they don't care. They aren't going to sell out just because they want to move more product. Ben could probably make a lights out IPA, but he doesn't. And they stick to their guns. They do sell out of their product now, but they've never wavered from that. A lot of the beers they bottle condition, and it takes 8 weeks, which is insane. And but they do it because they care about quality the most. And the boys over at Four Winds too, who everybody knows about because they always win. They won Brewery of the Year in 2015 and for Canada, and they won Beer of the Year this year. And we've always been good friends with those guys. They were the first collaboration we did was with those guys, and they always inspire us just based on how much creativity that goes into what they do. Both those boys, Kylo and Brent, come from restaurant backgrounds, and you can really taste it in their beer that they are mixing and matching flavors based on how you would pair food together. And so that always inspires me for sure. Those, just any brewery that's making great stuff. And then there's other breweries that inspire me by just doing cool branding and marketing initiatives that from a business perspective, I'm always in awe of that, how smart they are and how I wish I'd thought of that first.
Right. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Big thanks to Jorden and Eric for their time and showing me around the brewery. If you find yourself in their tap room or see their bottles in a local store, I suggest the Red Pilsner or the Black Lager. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Cascadian Beer Podcast. If you want to stay up to date with new releases of this podcast and want to support this independently produced series, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Cascadian Beer. Alternatively, you can subscribe on iTunes and many other major podcasting platforms. While you're there, please give us a rating and a review. It really helps us out. For more information and to follow this podcast series, head to cascadian.beer. Until next time, remember, support your local.